parenting is a life. It's not a formula. The big test that we're preparing our kids for is not their 6th grade algebra test. It is that day they stand before Almighty God. Everything you need to be as a parent, the Holy Spirit is. Raising children isn't easy. Don't do it alone. Welcome to our 4th session today for our parenting seminar. And we're saving toddlers for last here. And glad you're here. The most important part of the toddler stage of raising our kids is getting control of our toddlers. And every kid's differently, and for some kids that's going to be nothing. I mean, for some kids you look at them wrong and they cry and they're sorry and they repent. Other kids, they'll do something wrong right in your face, look right at you and dare you to do something about it. And every kid's different. But this is, somebody's laughing because you have one of those kids? Yeah. And they're all different. But the key to this stage of parenting is to gain control of them, that they obey and respect your voice. And my friend Rick Whitney shares a story about one of his young kids. They were consistent with discipline and training them to obey. And they were living in Florida at the time, and one of their small boys, a ball, the typical thing that we all fear, this ball rolled down the driveway into the street, and Rick saw the car coming. And that boy he's a boy. Boys chase balls like dogs. And this boy is running down this driveway to chase that ball, and Rick says, "Stop!" And that boy just stopped on a dime, and that car went right by. And just a very graphic example of the fact that, one of the reasons we're training our kids like this to obey is for their own safety. And but that boy stopped, and that was because of good, consistent training. And I'm going to talk in more detail today about why we need to help our kids gain control here. It's not so that our life will be easier, it's so their life will be easier. And we'll talk more about that. Let's just pray for a moment here. Father, we just thank you so much for our kids. They are beautiful. They are wonderful. What a joy, what a gift. But Lord, we recognize too there's something in them that's ugly. And every kid, I don't care how cute they are, there's something in them that rebels. There's something in them that is selfish and self-centered, and there's something ugly in every one of our kids. Help us today to learn how to deal with it. And thank you that you give us instruction on how to do that. I ask you to give these parents grace, Lord. All these things we're talking about today are challenging. Give them grace. Amen. I've said previously today that don't forget that as you're raising your kids, God is raising His kid, you. And every stage in life has its challenges in parenting, and it's interesting to see new parents. They get married and then they have a kid, and now they're responsible to actually tell somebody else what to do. They're actually responsible for another person in that way and to enforce. They're actually responsible now, maybe for the first time, to be a boss. And they're not used to that. They've never been in that position before, to be telling other people what to do. To be an authority that, hey, you need to obey me. They've always been, obeying others, following others. Well, now someone's got to obey me. And that can be really intimidating, by the way. And you got to understand, that's where God has you right now in your life. He's put another person in your life now that He wants to follow you. And that can be a little intimidating. You can feel like, I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready to have somebody following me. Well, what are you going to do when they're teenagers? Then they really need to be following you. And so you can't be wimpy about parenting. You got to accept this responsibility that God's put this kid in my life. I'm the parent, they're the kid, and I'm not perfect. But I'm going to do the best I can as a parent to love this kid and train them. And one of the challenges that God gives us right up front with these little kids is what I'm going to talk about, the me monster inside of them. I mean, wouldn't it be great if our kids were just always sweet, and they didn't get difficult till they became teenagers? No, at about 6 months, you're trying to change that kid's diaper, and they're just squirming all over the table, and they don't want their diaper changed, and they're just rebelling. They won't sit still to have their diaper changed. What are you going to do? And even at a very early age, that rebellion starts coming out, and you got to deal with it. And I don't want to be too harsh, but your kid, I don't care how cute they are, they're going to become ugly if you don't deal with that ugliness inside of them. I've seen the cutest kids you can imagine that are out of control, and they're not very attractive. And we just don't want that. And I know you don't want that. And God doesn't want that, and He tells us how to not have that. So, yeah, a lot of my talk today is going to focus on spanking. And that's one of those dirty cuss words, in our culture today, spanking. In fact, I gave a message on spanking in 2008. So what is that, 4 years ago? And somebody on the internet found that message on the New Life website, and they put in a couple different places on the internet that I should be turned into DHS for advocating spanking and all this stuff. So we just took the message off the internet because it was just causing some trouble. It was causing some. There were people joining in on that site and talking about this message I gave about spanking. We are videotaping this because we want it to be available in the future for people, this whole conference today. So this is one of the things where I said earlier in a session that one of the reasons we're raising godly kids at New Life Community Church is because we don't care one whit what other people think about our child raising. I really don't care what other people think about how I raise my kids. What I care about is how God wants me to raise my kids. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to have that attitude even towards your parents. Now, my parents love my kids now, and they would tell you, they think I'm the greatest parent in the world now. Did they think that 15 years ago? Not necessarily. My mom, in particular, worked for the public school system, so, I wouldn't say they were unsupportive of us homeschooling, but it wasn't something they would have thought of. And I just tell you, you can't care one whit what other people think about the way you're raising your kids. You only got to care what God thinks. And don't let the world squeeze you into a mold where you're doing parenting the way the world does it, because we've talked all day how miserably parents are failing today. Not just parents in the world, parents in the church are failing miserably at raising their kids. And we gave some statistics earlier about that. And it's because they're not willing to be radical enough in their parenting. And this is your first test of what kind of a parent you're going to be, is whether or not you're going to spank your kids when they need it. Are you going to give in to that nonsense about timeouts and that spanking is abuse, things like that, or are you going to believe what God says? Because God doesn't talk about timeouts. He doesn't say that spanking is abuse. He says, Proverbs 13:24. I'm asking, are you going to believe God, or are you going to believe the world? Here's your first test as parents. He who spares the rod hates his son, actually. But he who loves him is careful to discipline him. And in Proverbs, the Hebrew word there is musar, and it means to physically correct. We're not talking about, berating them with a sermon. We're talking about using the rod. That's what it says early in the verse. He who spares the rod. The rod is synonymous with discipline in these Old Testament Proverbs. And so you got to make a decision here. Are you going to raise them God's way or the world's way? And are you going to put up with the foolishness in the world or take the wisdom of God? I don't know if I have this. Hopefully I have this later on. But I'll be honest with you. I have some concerns about teaching about spanking. Because I don't want to give the impression that, you need to be a harsh disciplinarian, or I've been a harsh disciplinarian. One thing I want to say right off the bat here is never, never, ever spank your kids when you're angry. It would be better to let whatever happen, just let it go, than to spank them in anger. Spanking in anger really does hurt kids. And that's what the world's, of course, talking about. When they think of spanking, they think of some dad who's getting out a belt and whipping his kid, till he gets tired. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about abuse. We're talking about discipline. Big difference. Discipline's done with love. Discipline's spanking him with a smile on your face. And discipline is before you leave that room, they're smiling too, and they're hugging you. That's what discipline's about. One of the things I want to say about spanking is that it's a vital part. It is a vital part of your early stages of parenting, because you got to deal with that me monster in them. If you don't correctly deal with that me monster at this age, it's just going to get harder and harder to deal with it. And so it's a vital part of your parenting. It'll be a bigger part of some parents' lives than others because you got different kids. What's really interesting is their first kid will be a really compliant kid, and their second kid is a terror. And whoa, that's kind of hard, Every kid's different. But if you're consistent in it and you do it right, you'll have to do it less. I want to give you that promise. With whatever kid we're talking about, if you do it consistently and you do it right, you'll have to do it less. So I mentioned before, our boys are 12 years old. We think the last time we had to spank them was 2 years ago. And, they're all boy, but we've done it consistently. We've done it right. And so the amount you have to spank will be less if you do that. I'm going to tell you why I do talk about spanking openly at New Life Community Church, and that's because I love your kids. If some people on the internet want to criticize me for talking about spanking, okay. I love your kids enough to say, hey, there's sometimes you need to spank your kid, and you need to do it right, and you do it with love, but don't take this important tool out of your toolbox as a parent, especially with young kids. So some misconceptions about spanking. First, spanking is against the law. That's not true. There's nowhere in the United States that it's against the law. Unfortunately, in Europe, it's against the law. Isn't that amazing? You've got government officials telling a parent, you cannot do what the Bible says you're supposed to do with your kids. That's scary. It's not illegal in the U.S. What's illegal is to leave a mark or a bruise. And we'll talk about how to spank so that you don't do that. We don't want to leave bruises and marks, but that is against the law if you do that. I just want to encourage you to be wise about don't spank in public, of course. It's no good for the child anyway to be disciplined in public with people watching. Of course, hopefully none of you are going to be that dumb to do something like that. But you get angry. You see unbelievers doing that, don't you? In the grocery store, mom's swatting the kid with her hand. And, that's not what we're talking about. Now, there's some times where we've had to take our kids out to the car, leave Walmart, go out to the car, back seat, look around, nobody's looking, and discipline, and go back into the store. You will have to do that sometime. No parent is probably immune to having to do that, because there comes a point where your kid will test you in public. This works at home, but do I have to obey in public? And you're going to have to do things like that to help them understand, yep, you got to obey in public too. So the first misconception, spanking is against the law. That's not true. Second misconception, spanking has been proven ineffective. You can read all kinds of books and articles that tell you that. Here's a recent article in the New York Times. When it comes to rearing children, no debate is more contentious or longer running than the dispute over spanking. The question of whether to swat on the behind is an acceptable method of discipline has bedeviled parents, divided pediatricians who are split close to 50-50 in one survey, and spawned impassioned anti-spanking and pro-spanking camps. But a talk given yesterday at the annual meeting of the American Psychological Association in San Francisco is likely to amplify the uproar by several decibels. In it, Dr. Diana Baumrind of the University of California asserted that social scientists had overstepped the evidence in claiming that spanking caused lasting harm to the child. Quote, the scientific case against the use of normative physical punishment is a leaky dike, not a solid edifice, Dr. Baumrind said. Dr. Baumrind, a psychologist known for her classic studies of authoritarian, and permissive styles of child rearing, said she did not advocate spanking. But she argued that an occasional swat, when delivered in the context of good child rearing, had not been shown to do any harm. She's not a supporter of spanking, probably not even Christian. But scientifically, she says, look, you got to be honest. There's no scientific evidence that spanking harms kids. The studies cited by opponents of corporal punishment, Dr. Baumrein contended, often do not adequately distinguish the effects of spanking as practiced by non-abusive parents from the impact of severe physical punishment and abuse by those parents who are abusing their children. Amen. We're not talking about abusing children. A recent poll from ABC News said that 2/3 of Americans believe spanking can help children. A generation ago, however, it was 90%. So it is decreasing. Part of the problem is that spanking is automatically linked to child abuse. In fact, my Webster's thesaurus for spank has smack, slap, hit, strike. Well, we're not smacking our kid, across the face or anything like that. It's just different. Webster's definition of spank is to strike, especially in the buttocks, with the open hand. No, that's not spanking. God tells you not to use your hand. He tells you to use an instrument. And we'll talk about reason. Well, I'll just say why that is. God wants that kid to understand, look, this isn't personal. God doesn't want your kids to be afraid of you and your hand. He wants them to be afraid of that rod. He doesn't want them to hate you. He wants them to hate that rod. And that's a very healthy thing. God never wants you to spank them with your hand. Don't do that. And never on any other part of the body than the part of the body that God designed for them to be spanked, and that's the buttocks. They've got extra flesh there for this to happen so that it can sting but not bruise. God made their butt for that very reason. I'm convinced. Why else do you need all that cushion back there? I don't know. It's so you can be safely spanked. Proverbs 23 says, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish him with a rod, he will not die. Punish him with a rod and save his soul from death. The rod can be a very loving thing in a kid's life. And spanking will not permanently, physically hurt your kid if it's done correctly. Another misconception is a loving God wouldn't want me to spank my child. Let me read something from an anti-spanking website. This is, the Bible is often used to support, even perhaps to require, that parents use corporal punishment on children. Okay, that's how they define spanking, corporal punishment. That is not what spanking is. Discipline is different than punishment. We're not trying to hurt the kid. We're trying to train them. Many clergy today are speaking out against that interpretation of Scripture. The Reverend Dr. Thomas E. Sangan-Ford, retired Methodist minister, says the following: I can find no sanction in the teaching of Jesus or the witness of the New Testament to encourage the practice of corporal punishment at home, school, or anywhere else. A number of popular voices take a different view, often quoting Old Testament scriptures to prove their point. Those who subscribe to this argument misunderstand and misuse Scripture. At its General Conference in 2004, the United Methodist Church passed 2 resolutions against parents spanking their children. So the church actually said, look, in our churches, we do not want you spanking your children. Totally against the Word of God. Now, of course, we find the most specific information about spanking in the Old Testament. But Jesus grew up and spoke in that Jewish culture where spanking was happening, and he never corrected it. If he was concerned about all these Old Testament commands about spanking and said, look, this isn't New Covenant type parenting, he would have said so. And Jesus was spanked. I guarantee you that. And he grew up in a Jewish culture where spanking was... I don't want to say that. I don't know if Jesus was spanked. Let me back up on that. He didn't have a sinful nature. Maybe he never was spanked. Maybe he was. I don't know. I'm just saying he grew up in a culture where spanking was very, very common, part of life. And so he never corrected that. Proverbs 23, again, are you going to trust God in this or trust the world? Do not withhold spanking from a child. That's what Proverbs 23 says. And by the way, God himself spanks his kids. In Hebrews, it talks about, look, just as you discipline your kids, God disciplines you. And God does sometimes allow painful things in our lives to teach us and train us. And so spanking, discipline is, God doesn't give us timeouts. He doesn't yell at us in anger. That's not how he disciplines us. He allows pain in our life to discipline us. And so spanking, physical discipline, painful discipline, is a New Testament concept, not just Old Testament. Another misconception is spanking is cruel. Well, again, what does Proverbs 13 say? He who spares the rod hates his son. You know, these yo-yos, the way they talk, if you spank your kids because you hate them, God says something different. If you don't spank your kid, you hate them. Totally different reversal of values here. But he who loves him is careful to discipline him. If you love your kid, you'll spank him. And that's quite frankly why a lot of parents won't spank their kids. They don't love them enough. I'll just say that flat out. It's too inconvenient. They don't care enough. They'd rather just yell at the kid. They'd rather just ignore the kid. They don't love them enough to take the time to discipline them with a spanking the right way. And it takes time to spank the right way. It doesn't take any time for you to reach out, swat that kid with your hand, and move on. That's not biblical discipline. Now, that might be easier, but we'll talk about, especially in this handout here. I mean, it's an involved process to do it right. Other means, people talk about how abusive spanking is. I'll tell you what's abusive is anger. I've already talked about that. Yelling at your kids is going to hurt them far more than spanking them. Far more. The Bible warns you of that. The Bible says in Proverbs 27, anger is cruel and fury overwhelming. Anger is cruel. James 1:20, man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God requires. You got to burn that on your brain. Anger never accomplishes what it promises to. It lies to you. Anger says, look, if you just raise your voice and get angry here, then your kid will obey. Well, they might, but you're not training them. You're not helping them. They're not learning anything good. They're, in fact, learning bad. And I think maybe it was in the last class I mentioned that when you're angry with your children, what it does is it separates them from you. They can't trust you. You lose trust with them when you get angry with them. Imagine our relationship with God if He's always angry with us. Have you met Christians who think God's mad at them? They don't have a very good relationship with God. What that anger does is it separates us from our kids. And so you just can't do it. Anger trains your children that they do not need to obey until you get really mad. It's so easy to fall into that. And our kids learn that. I don't need to obey until they get really mad. Boy, how many parents do you see that live that way? It's exhausting. You think spanking's hard. Try to raise a kid without it. It's harder, especially if you got a especially wild one. Impossible. Steve Nelson in Premeditated Parenting says, quote, timeouts can communicate. So a lot of people, even Christians, think this whole timeout thing is, what you should do. Quote, timeouts can communicate that the parent cannot tolerate being around the misbehaving child. As the child grows, they may project that onto God and feel that when they do wrong, there's a break in their relationship with God. A spanking communicates more clearly that the parent's love is still the same. The child is still accepted, but he or she must be corrected. Spanking is actually the best way. Look, there's sin here. It needs to be dealt with, but we'll deal with it, and then we're going to love each other, and we're going to move on. That's what God wants. Stuff like timeouts, yelling at them, and then you've got this dysfunctional relationship with your kid. They know you're mad at them. They're mad at you. It goes on for a day, weeks. No. It could have been dealt with in 5 minutes in a spanking, and you could have left that room hugging each other, and it'd be done with. That's what God wants. Some people, instead of spanking, try reasoning. Oh, I would laugh at some of the things I've read if it wasn't so sad. When you hear these people talk about how to reason with your toddler, try to help them understand why they're supposed to do this and do that. You don't have to spank them. You don't have to use this stuff. Try to, just reason with them. Help them understand. That's foolish. It's just foolish. You're going to exasperate them and yourself by trying to reason with a 2-year-old. Some reasons parents will not spank their parents, and again, I don't want to, reasons parents will not spank their children, and I don't want to be too harsh here. Because I could use words like, they don't care enough and they're too lazy. Okay? But let me maybe try to couch it in a little bit more nicer terms. They believe the world instead of God on this issue. They just don't believe in it. They didn't grow up with spanking, and they just, they don't believe in it. Secondly, it's too inconvenient and messy. Yeah, it's messy. And it's inconvenient. Was talking to some parents here a while back, and they told me, well, Pastor, spanking doesn't work with our kids. Really? Tell me how you're doing it. and they were spanking with the kid's diaper on. Well, that isn't going to have much of an effect. Those diapers are, they got a lot of cushion there. They thought they could spank through the diaper, and it was just kind of like the impact or the sound of spanking a diaper that was going to do the job. Now, it's a whole lot more inconvenient to have to take take part of that diaper off of that kid's bottom so you can spank the bare skin. A lot less convenient, but that's what works. And sure enough, later they told me, oh, yeah, that made a difference. That works now. And so it is inconvenient and messy, but how much do you love your kid? Sometimes parents won't spank because they're immature themselves. I talked about that before, that they've never been in charge of anybody before. Their self-esteem is so low that they have a hard time telling this kid what to do and expecting them to obey. And I've seen moms and dads that have such low self-esteem that when their parents disobey, they don't really care because they think so little of themselves that, and this is particularly, well, I see it with all ages, they just don't have much, they don't think much of themselves, so their kids just disobey them. It's like no big deal. Boy, when my kids disobey me, it matters. Because I'm a servant of God, I'm a child of God, and it matters. And I think it's because I have a healthy self-esteem that it matters that my kids disobey me. Some parents can think, well, our kids will grow out of this stuff. Just easier, just let them grow out of these temper tantrums. Take the easy route. No, they don't grow out of those temper tantrums. It just manifests itself in different ways. As I said before, if you don't deal with the me monster, which I'll talk about in a minute here, he will manifest himself in that kid's life their whole life. And Proverbs 29:15 says, the rod of correction imparts wisdom, but a child left to himself disgraces his mother. A child left to himself, just to raise himself, will disgrace his mother. God put this kid in your life for a reason. They need a parent. They need a parent. So in all this, as you're thinking about this, you can see how God uses parenting to help you grow up. He's helping you grow up and to become more of an adult in this whole thing. Reasons to spank your children. God commands us to, for one reason. Again, in our first session, we shared these are not your kids, ultimately. They're God's kids. And you're supposed to be raising them the way God wants you to raise them and with the values that He wants you to raise them with. You don't have permission to raise them any way you want to because they're not ultimately your kids. They're God's kids. Second reason to spank our kids is it teaches the child to respect authority, which we talked about in the earlier session, how that's so vitally important for our kids to grow up to respect authority. As I mentioned, you talk to a public school teacher, either in middle school or high school, these kids do not respect authority, and it is ruining their life. It ruined my life to not respect authority. And it had to be the military, until I joined the military, and that's how I learned to respect authority. And so, very important. Another reason to spank our kids is that it's easier for the child than their whining, crying, and pouting and your harsh words and anger. I mean, what's the alternative here? Your kid's just pouting, crying, whining, and you're mad. Is that better than a spanking and dealing with it? It's not. It's so much better. In fact, in the long run, it's so much easier to deal with this stuff the way God told you to deal with it instead of putting up with it. So, Proverbs 29:17, discipline your son and he will give you peace. Because that's, there's sometimes in our households there's not a lot of peace. These kids are driving us crazy. Discipline your son and he will give you peace. He will bring delight to your soul. If this family could have been here today, I would have had them here today to give you a testimony because, again, it was just 2 weeks ago that they came to me and said, we've got this 2-year-old that is running our family. We are not a happy family. This 2-year-old is the boss of our family. He has such a strong will. We'll tell him to do something, he will look right at us and say no. And he has no respect for what we say. Now, they've had 2 other children that were more compliant, so they're like, wow, what is this kid? And they were starting to not like this kid. I mean, Mom especially, boy, she was struggling in her heart. I don't like this kid anymore. He was really cute when he was 6 months. Now when he's 2 and he won't do anything I say, I'm really struggling. I don't even like being around this kid. I'll talk about, I mean, the power of the me monster inside of a 2-year-old is incredible. The me monster can be incredibly powerful. And he will run your house if you let him. And so Brenda and I sat down with him. We had about an hour conversation about spanking. And again, that's that couple that came back, a couple weeks later and said, wow, our family's totally different. Thank you so much. And they said, that kid is completely different. That's a completely different 2-year-old now that we have been correctly and consistently spanking him. And discipline your son, and he will give you peace. He will bring delight to your soul. It's just true. It's just true. Another reason to spank our kids is it trains their conscience even at an early age. It's training them to know right from wrong. They don't know that. You could train your kid to believe that cannibalism is okay, and some cultures do. Our kids' conscience are a blank slate for us to put on there what we want to put on there. And so this spanking trains their consciences to know right from wrong. And by the way, this is why we have wicked teens, is their consciences have never been trained, and that's a scary thing. I mean, the scariest thing about our culture today is we are raising kids who have no conscience. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Are we going to reap the whirlwind on that one? That is scary. That is scary. The final thing I want to share about reasons to spank your kids is because don't let the me monster abuse your child. Again, people talk about spanking, abusing your child. Let me tell you what abuses your child. They are born with sin inside of them. The Bible says that. They are born with a sinful, selfish, God-hating, people-hating nature. It's inside them. They're born with that. They're infected with sin. And I call it the me monster because our kids are born thinking that they're God and that everything needs to revolve around them. And it isn't a really ugly thing when you see a person grow up and that never changes. They're now 42 and they still think everybody revolves around them. It's a really ugly thing. But every person is born with that sinful nature, the me monster. And I call it the me monster because it's self-focused. It's, look, my purpose in life is to be happy. Your purpose in life is to make me happy, and that's all I'm living for. That's what they're born with. I call it the monster because I'm not exaggerating. And if you ever have a strong-willed child, monster is an accurate description. I mean, this can be a powerful force in their life. And sin. Imagine a stranger coming into your house, knocking down your door. They come in, your kid's playing in the living room. They grab your kid by the neck. They're holding them by the neck, and they're just strangling them. And you're sitting there. And imagine that you just sit there and let it happen and let it just keep going. And this stranger just grabbed your kid's neck. He's just shaking him uncontrollably, and you're just letting it happen. That is exactly what so many parents do when their kids get out of control and the me monster is just pounding on them and controlling them, and you don't do anything about it to help them. You see, the thing about the me monster is that your kid can't control the me monster. They're not old enough yet. Their will is not strong enough yet to say no to the me monster. That me monster is a big bully in their life, living inside. They got a big bully living inside of them. And parents, you are the only one strong enough to deal with that bully. You are the only one that bully will fear. That bully doesn't fear a kid. That bully will control your kid if you let them. I don't know if you're going to see a parent who hates their kid more, the one who lets their kid just fall on the floor in a temper tantrum, and they just turn their back and go away. What that parent doesn't understand is that there is a stranger inside that kid making them do that, even against their will. You think that kid wants to act that way? They can't control it. You have to help them control it. You have to put the me monster, that bully, in its place. If you don't do that, that me monster will control them all their life. That is your responsibility as a new parent. one of your most important responsibilities is to put the me monster in his place and to teach and learn, train that me monster to know, I'm not the boss here. I can't just control this kid anytime I want to. Now, I know I'm personifying this whole thing. I don't want to get into child psychology about what's really going on inside this kid's head. But I do want you to understand, our kids are in Romans 7. Romans 7, Paul's talking about he's been a Christian for 20 years now. He says, man, I do the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I want to do. I've been a Christian, I've been an apostle for 20 years. And he says, that's sin living in me that's making me do that stuff. Our little kids have sin living in them that's making them do things that they really wouldn't do. They want to please mom and dad. They don't want to have temper tantrums. They don't want to be whiny and disobedient. But they have sin living in them. And they're not old enough to control that sin themselves. They don't have enough belief structure to control that sin themselves. So you have to control it for them. That's your job. And if you don't do that, you are doing your kids such a great disservice. I'm telling you, it's just like some stranger walking in your house, grabbing your kid by the throat, and just shaking him, and you don't do anything about it. If a stranger walked in my house and did that, that stranger would get hit. All right? That stranger would have to deal with me now. And this is so important for you to understand. You see, it's not your kid. When I'm spanking my kid, I am not spanking my kid. I'm spanking the me monster. I separate the me monster from my kid. My kid doesn't want to do that. And Paul does the same in Romans 7. He says this. He says, it's not me that's sinning. Because I want to do good. That's the real me. The real me wants to please God, but I got this sin, this disease of sin living in me that makes me do things I don't want to do. You're not spanking your kid. You're spanking the me monster. I hate the me monster in my kids. I don't hate my kids. I hate the me monster. I don't give the me monster any slack whatsoever. He knows I hate him. The me monster in my kids knows. You peek your head out, you're going to deal with me. I don't give any grace to the me monster. I give a lot of grace to my kids. 0 to the me monster. And he learns to obey. It's a little bit like having a dog, all right? And don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying that our kids are dogs. What I'm saying is that me monster needs to learn who's the alpha dog here. Who's really in charge. And it's just very, very important, especially dads. You take that responsibility. Now, your temptation, because the me monster can be so powerful and so nasty sometimes, and you hate him so much. You hate what this sin does inside your kid's life. The temptation is to spank in anger. Don't do that. When I'm talking about being tough against the me monster, I'm not talking about being mean. I'm not talking about being angry. I'm talking about spanking your kid with a smile on your face. Don't let the me monster get you out of the spirit, because you will serve the me monster's purposes. I mean, the me monster loves to be spanked in anger. You're just serving his purposes. You're going to give that me monster more control when you try to use anger against him. Okay? And I know I'm kind of personifying this, but I hope that word picture helps you. This me monster, it's not the devil that you got to worry about when your kids are toddlers. Okay? When your kids are teens, we got to start talking about the devil. When they're little kids, we're talking about their flesh. That's what you're really dealing with when they're little kids, is their flesh, not so much the devil. Biblical child psychology says this, okay? Proverbs 22:15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. Folly in the Bible means evil. It doesn't mean that they're just foolish, but being a fool in the Bible is to be wicked, is to be morally evil, to be a fool. So this folly, this sin, listen to this, is bound up in the heart of a child. Oh my goodness, they're born with it. It's bound up in there. It's inescapable to have this evil bound up in the heart of your child. It's there. I don't care how cute they are. I don't care how compliant they are. Every kid is born with evil bound up in their heart. And what is God's solution? Yelling at them, timeouts, reasoning with them, just letting it go, hoping they grow out of it. But the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. The only thing the me monster responds to is physical pain. It's a little bit like, again, dog training. You got to have consequences. The only thing that the me monster responds to is physical pain. I wish it wasn't that way, but that's just the way it is. And that's how you're going to weaken that me monster, is to deal with them and discipline that me monster when it's acting up. If our little children could talk and they understood what was really happening inside of them, they would tell us, please, please help me with this bully inside of me. Please help me. I can't control this. I need help. Deal with the me monster in my life. If they're old enough to understand, that's what they would tell us. And, it can help to even help these little kids understand what's going on, that they have a me monster. Because they can start, their identity can start being, okay, well, I'm a sinner. I'm a bad boy. No, you're not a bad boy. You're a good boy with sin living inside of you. That is so important for them to understand. And for them to understand that when you're spanking them, I'm not spanking you, son. I'm trying to deal with the me monster here. And to gain this language with your kids so that, they're starting to recognize when the me monster is operating in their life. They start recognizing it. Okay, they start getting whiny or angry, and you can stop and say, well, son, is that you or is that the me monster acting right now? Oh, that's the me monster in me. Well, what do we want to do? We want to stop that, don't we? You notice in Romans chapter 7, Paul's talking about the struggle. He says, I hate sin in me. I hate the me monster. And boy, if you can get your kids to have that same attitude, I hate the me monster, Mommy. I hate him. Well, now you're on to something. They're involved in this struggle now too. Not just controlled. And so many kids grow up not only controlled by the me monster, but ignorant of him. Like this is the way it's supposed to be, and there's no options. You help them understand, to gain responsibility that no. And as they get older, they'll learn to be able to say no to the me monster. And you're spanking them helps weaken the me monster so they can start to gain some control over the me monster, because you are weakening the me monster by putting it in its place. I know this can sound challenging, particularly if you've got a strong-willed kid. The me monster is stronger in some kids than others, and I don't have any explanation for that. And you can think this is a little overwhelming. Brenda and I have talked to many, many young parents who are just pulling their hair out. This is war, man. This is war. And by the way, this is what I told this dad a couple weeks ago. I said, look, you need to take some time off work. And you need to spend a week with that kid. And you need to bring the battle to him. And you need to bring the battle to him. And be at home and train this kid and put this me monster in its place. Because this is war. It is war. It's war over your kid's soul. That's what Proverbs says. It's war. I'm not going to lose. I am not going to lose the war to the me monster. I'm just not going to do it. Some of you have heard me tell my story about Jessica. I don't think she was even 2 yet. And she had a strong will. She was a very smart child, for one thing. And that's one thing that, you're just kind of surprised. This kid's 18 months old, and you're really surprised at how much they really perceive and how intelligently they're disobeying, And it's just amazing to see the recognition in their eyes, and they are intentionally disobeying. It's just amazing. The first time you see it, where did my little girl go? And this was Jessica, and she's about 18 years old. She's walking. And I just knew I didn't have her heart. I was not boss in her life. And neither was Mom. And so one day, I set her at one end of our living room. I went to the other end of the living room. And I said, backed up like this. And I said, Jessica, come here. And she just stood there. Didn't do anything. So I went over and I spanked her, sat her down, walked back over here. Jessica, come here. She just stood there. This went on at least a half an hour. Okay, I don't remember exactly. I didn't count how many times I spanked her. But I wasn't going to lose that battle. I was bringing the battle to the me monster, and I was saying, today's the day. You're going to find out who's boss, because I'm not giving in. You're the one that's going to give in. And that's what you have to do with a strong-willed kid. You've got to win that battle. And, it even got to the point where you could just see this internal struggle inside of her. There came a point where I'd say, Jessica, come here, and she'd go like this. She'd take one step, and then she'd stop. And it's like, yeah. It was just amazing to see that internal struggle inside of her. But I loved her enough to put the bully inside of her in his place. I did not lose that battle that day. Now, Mom was crying. Mom wasn't very happy, if I remember correctly. It was hard on all of us, okay? But I just wasn't going to lose that battle. And nobody is going to disrespect me in my home like that. It's not because I have a big ego. It's because it's what God wants. And again, I know that can sound like a harsh disciplinarian, but really that's love. And with a strong-willed child, you've got to win that battle, and you've got to take the battle of them. I wasn't just going to dink around, okay, every time they disobey, I was like, no, I'm going to bring the battle. I'm going to give them a specific, clear command, and I'm going to be in their face on this. I'm bringing the battle of them, and I'm going to win. And that changed Jessica's life. It changed her life. It changed our family. And that's what this dad did here a couple weeks ago. Again, if they were here, I'd have him telling his story. That's just what has to happen sometimes. Now, again, maybe that has not had, in my recollection, I never had to do that with any of my other kids. Okay, so every kid's different. But that's sometimes what we have to do because that me monster is so strong in their life. I think that in general, I can make spanking sound like such a big, huge deal here, but really, if it's done correctly and consistently, it becomes a critical but infrequent part of raising our kids. And but there are days, especially when they're small. It wasn't atypical in a day for Brenda to have to spank one of her kids half a dozen times that day. That's not atypical. That can happen. But as I mentioned earlier, well, now it's been 2 years since we had to spank one of our boys, as far as we can remember. And but there are those days that you're in the heat of the battle on that issue. I did give a handout that's got a lot of extra stuff about spanking. I think it'd be very, very helpful to you to read through and talk through. And by the way, I mentioned in an earlier session, I mentioned in the first session about one of the 7 essentials of parenting. One of those essentials was to work on your marriage, and an essential part of working on your marriage is having a weekly date. All right? Now, if you're here today without your husband, you go home and tell your husband, Pastor said, we're not working on a marriage if we're not having a weekly date. I'm dead serious about that. I don't want to offend you, but don't tell me you're working on your marriage if you're not having a date once a week to talk about stuff, okay? Life gets busy. Make that date happen. And this is exactly the kind of stuff. You take your notes from this seminar today. You take these notes,